I really appreciate the invitation to speak to IIE. I've really admired what the Institute has done over the years. I first heard Alan speak in, I think it was Qatar, about 4 years ago, and he spoke most eloquently and impressively about the activities and programs of the Institute as well. And I was very honoured when he asked me to speak to you. I have a prepared speech which I'll endeavour to stick to with a certain amount of fidelity, but I will probably go off script quite a few times to just extemporise on a couple of matters, because I want to try to give you a sense of what we've been doing in the whole area of international engagement, certainly since I became president, which is now nearly 6 years ago, and probably 18 months or so earlier than that when I became provost, when we really started to develop our international strategy. And I'm going to go through our international strategy first, and the various components of that. I always try when I'm speaking as a president to avoid exercises in institutional triumphalism, but I'm afraid you can't help doing a certain amount of it by way of setting the scene and so on, so forgive me for that, but it's more giving you an idea of the sort of broad strategies for international engagement for the whole university. And then I'm going to talk, and Alan was very kindly spoke about this, I'm going to talk about our academic strategies, and then how we're trying to connect the two up together. I think in ways that a few other institutions are also endeavouring to do, but where I think there really are genuinely unique opportunities to connect up the international strategy of an institution and its educational engagement with the deep academic programs and initiatives within an institution. Well, let me start by saying that I don't think anybody denies that certainly the major research universities all over the world are international institutions, and they are today, but even a cursory examination of history shows that this has really always been the case for the great universities. They've really known no geographical boundaries, but they've really encompassed all human knowledge, and faculty and students have come from all over the world, from all cultures and all social backgrounds. You read about the great medieval universities, the great Indian universities before that, and so on, and they really drew scholars and faculty from everywhere. And scholarship and research in just about every discipline, from anthropology to zoology, is now these days truly international, and one cannot emphasize that enough. And this process has been hugely accelerated, in fact probably fundamentally accelerated by the internet. And the scholarship and research that takes place, or scholarship and research takes place within a global environment where ultimately it is facts and reason that determines progress, not national origin. As I'm always fond of saying, there really is only only zoology. There's not American zoology or Chinese zoology. There's just zoology, and the same is true pretty much for every other discipline. People may have disagreements within those disciplines, but those disagreements are based on the fundamental intellectual questions, and rarely and only in minor ways, by and large, I would claim, on national origins. And hence the quality of programs and research at universities is determined by the quality of the faculty and students who contribute to them, and they can come from anywhere in the world. And fundamental to research as well, especially in the sciences, is collaboration. And whether this is between two co-authors on opposite sides of the world, I mean, a process that has been just absolutely turned upside down by the internet, obviously, or groups of thousands from dozens of countries working on major experimental facilities, like most famously the case that everybody cites, the CERN particle at the LHC in Geneva, but that's only one of hundreds of thousands of facilities like that, where there are multinational collaborative teams, and the scientific output. If you ever see any of the papers that come out of CERN, there may be 1,000 authors on some of those papers that come out as well. And this then is the present context concerning international engagement in which research universities work. And of course, many of us in positions like mine seek not merely to allow this engagement to happen randomly, but we're trying to provide it with some structure and direction through institutional international strategies that try to maximize its benefits to the core missions of our institutions, which are, of course, education, research, and service. Now, as I said, I'm going to sketch our international strategy, and the first half of my talk will comprise that. But I noticed that this strategy, I think, is probably not that different to that of other large research institutions and other institutions not so large as well. But I want to say, just to give you just a little context about the university, just to give you an idea of the scale of the institution and the context in which we're working. We're a large multi-campus. We're not a system. We're one university with multiple campuses. And we have top-ranked programs in a whole range of different professional areas, as shown by some results that just come out in the last week or so. In the health sciences, pretty much the whole gamut of the health sciences, in a whole range of different areas of technology, except education, except engineering, which is the prerogative of our colleagues at Purdue. And we've got an extensive history of research and scholarship of the highest order over the nearly 200 years of our existence, 8 Nobel Prizes and about 50 programs ranked in the top 20 nationally. And we're one of the members of the AAU. We're one of the largest public university systems. We've got a budget of about $3 billion, 8 campuses across the state, 8 medical education centres, which are really extension centres of our School of Medicine, which in turn is the second largest in the nation. We've got about 110,000 students. We employ about 6,000 faculty, 11,000 staff, 42,000 students in Bloomington, about 30,000 on our Indianapolis campus. And the majority of our international engagement takes place on these 2 campuses. We have another 30,000 odd students on our regional campuses. And our health system, Indiana University Health, is the largest hospital system in the state. It's got hospital medical facilities pretty much all around the state, and is one of the largest hospital systems in the country. In fact, if you put our hospital system together with the university, we're the largest employer in the state of Indiana. So it kind of puts it in perspective, the size of the institution. Now, our history of engagement in international activity and scholarship goes back at least 100 years. And like many American universities, the developing and maturing of our programs in international engagement came during what I think many think of as the golden age of higher education. And after World War II, of course, American research universities became magnets for students and faculty from around the world. And most universities have an iconic figure who provided the fundamental drive and leadership in an institution during that period. And with Indiana University, it was a man called Herman Wells, a very famous figure in higher education, probably known to some people here as well. And it really was to Herman Wells that we can thank him for the wide range of really first-rate international faculty who were attracted, the whole range of international alliances that were established with governments and institutions all around the world. He served at the UN for a period as well, and played a major role in expanding our foreign language curricula as well. And his vision really was to bring the world to students from the towns and cities in Indiana, where so many of the bright young students who came to Indiana University had never been outside the state, in some cases really outside the boundaries of their particular county. But the global context, and I should say one other thing about Wells too, he travelled extensively, and I have also travelled extensively as president. but I'm the first president of AU to have travelled as much as Wells did, or probably no near as much as Wells did, but at least on the scale that Wells did. And the number of places I've been where the last AU president who was there was 70 years ago, and that was Herman Wells. That's really quite remarkable. Anyway, the global context in which we operate is very different today. In the flat, fluid world, as people say, which we work, we're really required to change the strategies that we use to engage globally. And given these trends and our fundamental mission of research and education, our strategy consists of 5 components. Now, let me just say just a little about the background here. I started at Indiana University as the Vice President for Information Technology and Professor of Computer Science in 1997, and then became Vice President for Research in 2003 and Provost in 2006. And I've worked internationally my whole career, in Europe and in Asia in particular, and have played a role in the university's very substantial international engagement and high-performance networking. We manage, IU manages most of the major high-performance networking connections between the US and most of the rest of the world out of our Global Network Operations Center. That was a world in which I worked, so I was fully familiar with the importance of international engagement and research and education in that field. But from where I sat, I noticed that the university would announce a partnership with this university, or would have a delegation going to this country and so on. And when I became provost, I started asking questions. I wanted to what was our strategy? Well, we didn't have one. And I'm not, in saying that, I'm not being critical of anybody, just that no one had actually sat back and actually thought about why should we be engaging internationally? What was the point of doing this? And what should our priorities be if we were to do so? And I said we all can come up with reasons, but there isn't a clear statement institutionally of what our goals are, why we want to do this, what's important to us, and so on as well. So I started when I was provost. I asked a number of people in the faculty and our then Dean of International Studies to develop an international strategy, and I rapidly became, to my surprise, president. So then I just converted that into a program to develop a university strategy, and that was released soon after I became president. And that strategy really said that there were 5 components to Indiana University's international strategy, and the first of these, and I've always stressed this is number 1 for the university, the first of these was to increase the number of Indiana University students who travelled abroad. And here we stated as one of the real fundamentals of our international engagement that we just believed that it was essential for every Indiana University student in future to have an international component to their education. We believe that no student in this day and age should graduate from a university like ours without having some fundamental education and some aspect of global literacy. And that, of course, is very wide, very flexible, depending on what area you're working in. That is now embedded in our general education curriculum for the whole university. It's fairly broad in terms of what it implies, what it involves, but nevertheless it is there, and it is a fundamental part of the university and has been endorsed by our trustees in the university. So will be part of what we do, I think, for a long time as well. And then secondly, as part of that international component of our general education curriculum, one of the ways a student can meet that is by studying abroad. And my goal was, as much as I'm delighted to have students from Indiana University go to my home country or to England, I wanted to encourage an expansion of the number of our students who went to non-Anglophone countries around the world, where they really would be stressed and tested more by working in a non-English speaking environment as well. Then another part of that strategy was that when you look at our students who study abroad at the moment, they disproportionately come from wealthy backgrounds or from well-to-do backgrounds as well. It's the minority students, it's the students from low-income backgrounds who are not getting funded to travel overseas to study abroad. So I announced about 3 years ago that we would start a new campaign, a $20 million campaign to fund 400 $5,000 scholarships to aid minority and low-income students in studying abroad, and that the university would match those one for one as well. So that has started. That is gathering momentum. We leave it basically up to the donor as to whether that donor wants to fund 20 scholarships in country A versus country B, and so on and so on, and whether they have certain restrictions about the kinds of students from what school or what have you in the university. And that started to really gather some momentum and really attract attention. And then I'm also mindful of the fact that, unfortunately, there is a certain amount of political suspicion about students from overseas in some quarters, especially in state legislatures as well. And so I've always led with and always made a point that our first priority is to get more of our students overseas, and that is, I've found, at least in our state, is something that is welcomed by pretty much all legislators, all politicians, both sides of the aisle, as they say as well. Now we have seen a steady increase every year, and I'm delighted when the Open Doors report comes out every year. That's one of the things that I'm most impatient about getting, to see how our numbers stack up against our colleagues from elsewhere in the world. And we, at the moment, rank number 7. Our Bloomington campus ranks number 7 in terms of our students who are studying abroad, which means that at the moment the figure's I think it's about 2,300 students out of a graduating class of about 8,000 have studied abroad. So it's in the range of about 25% of our students have studied abroad. I would like to increase that figure to 50%. Now that's no mean feat. That would actually, I think, put us as number 1 if we achieve that. But that's no mean feat for a large public university. But I think this is just going to become an essential part of education, and I want to ensure that we will do everything we can to increase the number of our students who are studying abroad, no matter what their background, no matter what their family circumstances as well. Then secondly, the second part of the strategy is the recruitment and retention of outstanding international students as well. And there of course, we have not had any difficulty in recruiting international students. We rank in that regard number 11 in Open Doors in terms of the number of international students that we have. And here, of course, and this is, I'm sure, no different to any other university here, we see international students as really helping to diversify the campus. It is another vital part of the education of our students, that they learn how to work with people from other countries, other cultures on a regular basis, because that is what, as I tell them in every commencement speech I give, that is what they were going to be doing for most of them anyway, for the rest of their lives. And that preparation of working with colleagues from overseas as students is vital to them. And of course, there's also the argument of soft diplomacy, that the kinds of contacts and the relationship that one establishes with students from overseas in a university can be enormously beneficial, both to that institution and to the country, and to both countries, wherever that student comes from, for the rest of their lives. And the cases are just innumerable of where that has been beneficial for all involved as well. There is an interesting difference. Forgive me if anybody from Australia is here, or Britain or anywhere else, but there is an interesting difference between the recruitment of international students in the United States, certainly at public universities. It's maybe not true of the privates to the same extent, and the recruitment overseas. There is no differential or certainly in my university, there's no differential tuition for international students. So a student from China is no different than a student from California in terms of the fees that we pay. And I think it's fair to say that without naming any institutions, there have been some fairly egregious cases elsewhere in the world of institutions who have sought to make ready profit from low-quality international students and providing a less than adequate educational experience as well. I think one of the things, and I've said this whenever I've traveled many times, is that that is not the case in the United States. Certainly it's not the case in large research institutions, because we certainly want to recruit high-quality out-of-state students, but there's no premium attached to international students monetarily. There is culturally, there is intellectually, but there isn't monetarily as well. And it's an advantage that I would encourage people who are recruiting for international students to bear in mind as well. We have in total in the university about 8,000 international students. On our Bloomington campus, about 6,000. It ranks us about number 11, as I said, in the country as well. And then the third part of the international strategy is global faculty recruitment and research. This is an area that pretty much is self-motivated. Anybody here as a faculty member will have probably, even those of my generation, will have worked internationally to greater or lesser degree probably their whole career. These days it's just a fundamental and a given. And it's an area where the university, at least at the first level of approximation, should keep out of the way. Let the faculty members get on with their work, let them get on with their collaboration. But there are two things that we can do as institutions, or I think two important things we can do as an institution. One is, and here I can digress into technology, but I'll restrain myself. One is to really provide the best possible access to internet technologies to our faculty. This drove the involvement that Indiana University has in things like Internet 2. I'm actually now chairman of the board of Internet 2, but we also at Indiana University since 1998 have run the Internet 2 network in the United States that probably connects up every university represented by people here. And then we also run, as I said, all the international connections that connect the Internet 2 network to all of the equivalent networks in most of the major developed countries in the world, and then interconnects specialist networks in the United States like the Energy Sciences Network, which connects up all the energy labs with the research and education networks. This is a massive undertaking. If anybody's ever interested, you could visit our Global Network Operations Center in Indianapolis, and we have about 100 people, nearly all of whom are funded with external funding and grants. It's become a business who run this whole sort of massive exercise. But what it does is it provides enormously high-speed internet connectivity to faculty, to researchers, to students in the United States, and connects them to their colleagues at that level of connectivity all over the world. And that's almost taken as a given. You log in the morning, you do your work, you never really think about what actually is going on at the plumbing level, as we call it, that's making all that happening, and that continues to be able to scale up to deal with the increasing complexity and sophistication of multi-institutional collaboration over that infrastructure. And that was what drove our initial participation in all of these areas there. And I think not only do we provide, I think, a great service to the faculty and researchers in our institution, but we help to support many other institutions around the country and around the world as well. I just gave a keynote at a meeting in Hawaii of all the leaders of all of those regional networks around the world, and all of them think the same way about this, that what they're really doing is enabling the collaborative activities of their faculty, whether they're in archaeology or whether they're in genomics, to collaborate as well. That's the first thing. And then the second thing simply is to do all we can to enable our faculty to actually transport themselves physically, as it were, as opposed to virtually, and to enable them to travel. It is still such a fundamental part of what they do, to remove impediments to them doing so, to reward the ones who are most able and to encourage that kind of activity, and not to in any way deter faculty from being able to collaborate internationally, and to also at the same time enable their colleagues to come and work with them as well. Then supporting all three of those areas is what I call international institutional engagement. And here again, many institutions have not been systematic about how they've approached this. I've been struck by this. It's interesting, you travel the world and you find other institutions have been wrestling with the same problem. When I took over as president, we had 450 different MOUs and agreements of various kinds with universities all around the world. And I would ask, so what are the criteria we use as to when we sign an MOU? Which countries do we give priority to? Which institutions do we give priority? Which institutions do we say no to, and so on? None of that was written down. Again, I'm not being critical, just that we haven't really thought about this, but this huge enterprise had kind of expanded to this massive size. And I looked at some of these institutions that I knew were, how shall I say, less than adequate. And I know it's too easy that you go out and you get wine and dined, or wine and dine somebody and sign an MOU and then wake up the next morning and say, what have I done? And I'm afraid that every institution has done a few of those in their time as well. So I engaged I promoted the Dean of International Studies to a full vice presidency, made it a vice president's office, and then asked that office to carry out a comprehensive purge of all these agreements. Identify the ones that really were active, identify the ones that we wanted to become active that had become dormant, and then convert them all to a standard format, and make them all renewable every 5 years, so we didn't have something that had been lying around for 20 years that was of questionable quality as well. So the total number was reduced to less than 200 over a couple of years. And then I asked the question, well, how do we determine which other countries we should be signing MOUs with? My time's limited, the time of the Vice President in this area, David Zaret now, previously Patrick O'Meara, probably many of you knew Patrick, is limited. There's limited resources we can put into this, etc. So how do we determine the priority countries? So I had our institutional research people do an analysis, sort of what computer scientists call a constraint analysis, and I asked them to look at where our students went to study abroad, where our international students came from, where our alumni are, where our major international donors are, where the major institutions in the world are, and used the Shanghai Jiaotong ranking for that, and a number of other criteria, and used that to come up with what was the list of about 30 priority countries that we would give most of our attention to. Now, that group is not that surprising who popped out, but the key thing is that we had the data behind it to support that those particular countries. And so then we proceed as follows. We either we will systematically seek to renew or continue to reinvigorate the relationships that we have in those countries that are ones we want to preserve. We'll use the criteria of, because we're an AAU institution, we believe we should be establishing relationships in general with comparable institutions that are ranked according to some countries equivalent of the AAU grouping within that institution, within that country, or an institution that has some specialist competency in certain areas, and an excellent, maybe not a top university, but has a first-rate school of X, Y, or Z, etc. And that in the countries where we didn't have those relationships, we would seek to establish it, and that would be systematically what we would be doing institutionally. We have a group now that gives pretty thorough scrutiny to any proposed new MOU. Again, it was too easy for deans to come up with MOUs with places that didn't meet those kinds of criteria. And before they finally come to me, I personally review every one and decide whether or not we're going to sign that MOU with that institution. My career has been such that I tend to know most of the institutions that are worth establishing such MOUs with. So if I don't know it, I want to know a lot about that institution and why we should be establishing something with them as well. So we've done that. We've done that systematically. My goal as president is to visit it's 30 countries, is to visit every one of those countries. I've now visited as president well over half, and hope in probably about 3 years to have visited all of them. And that process is what we use to either renew relationships with top institutions there, or to establish new ones as well. And it's those institutional relationships and other relationships with relevant government departments and entities and so on that really provide the support for study abroad from IU to those countries and to those institutions, for recruitment and exchanges and so on between those institutions and our university, and in many cases deepen and enrich faculty collaboration, faculty engagement as well. And then finally, and I'll come back to this in a minute because I'm going to talk for maybe 5 minutes or so about global and international studies, which Alan mentioned. Then finally, I've instructed our Alumni Association that I want a chapter established of our Alumni Association in every one of those countries. And we are now just 3 short of having a chapter in every one. Now, in about half of them, we already had chapters, in a couple of cases, long functioning, very active chapters, but in many of them we didn't. So we now have chapters in all of those countries except just 3, and some of them have become very active very rapidly, which is delightful. And I have personally tried to inaugurate as many of those chapters as I can. Some of them are in countries where we actually have very substantial numbers of alumni. We probably have more alumni in Southeast Asia than most other than probably just about any other university in the United States. Would certainly be in the top 5, I think, in terms of our alumni: Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Indonesia. Those countries in particular. And I was there last year and inaugurated a chapter in every one of those particular countries there too. So that really is what provides the structure behind those first 3 areas. And of course there are many other programs that we take advantage of run by other organizations to support that as well. And then finally, of course, there's international outreach and service, the broader engagement with programs that benefit the nation, but also benefit some other country or some other constituency. The example that I give in the case of Indiana University, but there are many, many others. We've been heavily engaged in many countries around the world over the years. But the one that I always give as an example is our engagement with a program called AMPATH in Kenya. It is where I'll be visiting later this year. It's an AIDS treatment and prevention program that has treated hundreds of thousands of Kenyans and other people in the region, both who have AIDS and have educated people in AIDS prevention. And it's a holistic approach, really a marvelous program. It was Nobel Peace Prize nominated at least once. A marvelous program that really aims at a kind of holistic approach. There's such a stigma attached to AIDS in that region that quite often people can be cured, or the disease can be brought under control with the retroviral drugs, but then either their family's all dead or they're shunned and they die of starvation or malnutrition or something, terrible stories. But one of the fundamentals of the AMPATH program is really to be able to teach people how to survive, either in new occupation or ways by which they can they continue to support themselves after they leave the facility as well. And that as well as what it does on a humanitarian basis, a lot of it funded by USAID, a lot of it funded by donors from Indiana. What it also does is provide an opportunity for many of our medical students interested in global health issues of pandemics and so on, to be able to go and work in a very serious real-life situation, as well as members of our students in our School of Nursing and a number of our other health sciences related schools as well. And we have an extremely active, vigorous relationship with the local university, which has a medical school that we've helped establish more university nearby. So that's an example of that 5th area of international outreach and service. So that's the strategy, and probably nothing hugely surprising there, but the goal really has been to weld all this together into one coherent strategy, and then use that to drive priorities for the whole of the university. We have 22 schools, all 22 schools in the university, and what have you. If it conforms to the strategy, it'll be, and is of merit, it'll be supported and pursued. If it doesn't, it won't be. Now, let me come to the academic strategy in the institution, because I think one of the most interesting things, and what Alan was alluding to, one of the most interesting things we've done is we're now starting to weld the academic strategy of the university together with the international strategy. The international strategy is broad. It covers the whole university, all campuses, all schools, and what have you. As to the academic strategy, I set up a committee about nearly 4 years ago, just as the recession really started to bite. And that's obviously, I think as Rahm Emanuel said, never let a good crisis go wasted. And I wanted to really use that crisis as it was to have people seriously think about the academic future of the university. And the way I posed it to them, I mean, I have a sort of formal bureaucratic statement of this, but the way I'd like to try and pose it in simple language was if you were given, if in Indiana or any other state for that matter, you were given a budget of $3 billion and told to create a university system in that state, does anybody think it would look like what we have in Indiana today? Not a single person says, yes, it would. So having made that point, that whatever we did with that $3 billion would not look like what we have today, I then asked the question, well, what would it look like? Well, of course, no one agrees on that, what it should look like. But then the goal of the committee was to have people sit down, to have a group of people chaired by the provost, then provost and chancellor of our Indianapolis campus, to sit down and to actually try and hammer out what were the opportunities, where were the opportunities to offer new degrees to better serve our students and the students in the nation and internationally. Where were the areas where we should be building research strength and should be building intellectual and academic strength in the institution. And they came up with a report called the New Academic Directions Report, really excellent piece of work for all kinds of reasons. And it recommended a whole stack of things. I'll say in summary that since I got that report and then approved it myself and had the Board of Trustees agree to endorse it, we have in the last roughly 2 years either closed, established, merged, or transformed 7 schools in the university. So there's been more change, more academic change at Indiana University than probably the 20s when most of our schools from the earlier generation were established. I'll try and finish up in about 5 minutes, and I think I'm roughly at my time then. So I'll focus on just one of them, although they're very interesting developments in public health, for example, that are not entirely irrelevant to our discussions today. Indiana University, and some people may know this, a lot of people don't, is extraordinarily strong in the languages. We like to think we teach maybe more foreign languages than any other university in the country. Certainly we teach as many as any other university in the country. We teach somewhere between 70 and 80 depending on the year, many of which are not taught anywhere else, only taught by 1 or 2 other places, including a real speciality in the languages, Central Eurasia, Uzbek and Pashto and languages like that. But this is all spread over multiple departments, centres, units and so on as well. We also have great strength in area studies. We have 11 Title VI centres, which is more than any other university in the country as well. Now, people again may not know this unless they're in one particular area or the other. All of this, in my view, had been just dissipated across multiple units and what have you. This enormous intellectual strength, which collectively really represents international studies as a whole, was an area that we had not in any way coherently welded together. So coming out of the report was a proposal to establish a School of Global and International Studies. We put together the appropriate faculty groups, had the lengthy processes of consultation and discussion, et cetera, eventually got a very good proposal for a new school. Came to myself and the provost. We've approved it. We're going to fund it. We have funded it, and our trustees have approved it as well. So that will weld together that extraordinary, what we think of, extraordinary intellectual strength into one new school. and a piece that since I started by talking about basketball, a piece I can't resist but mention. We also have approved a new building, $53 million building, that will house the whole of the school. Half of that building is funded by revenue from the Big Ten network. And I think this is maybe the only case that I know of where athletics revenue on that scale, $25 million to be precise, is actually funding fundamental academic building in the university. So as I tell my colleagues, you absolutely support basketball on the weekend because you're supporting international studies at the same time. Now, the final part that I want to mention that kind of welds all this together, and this is really a developing strategy, is it really came out of a number of the visits I paid overseas, where, as I said before, I had met various people who said, wonderful to see you, great to have an IU president here again. The last one was Wells. How do we know that it'll be another 40 or 50 years before we see another IU president back here again? And there's a fair point there. There's a limit to what you can do. Presidents come and go. The interest, their focus, their foci changes over periods of time. And the way in which we develop this and thinking this through is what we want to do, what we're doing, is developing a fundamental connection between the alumni in these 30 countries, but others as well. There's nothing exclusive about it, but we're focusing on these 30 countries in particular, to develop a fundamental connection between them and the academic department in the institution. So presidents can come and go. The next president may not have the interest in international affairs that I do, but if you can weld together the alumni in all those countries and to give them a stake in what we're building with global and international studies in particular, but also our Kelley School is very strong in this area. Kelley School of Business is very strong in this area as well. But if you can weld them together, then that's something that's going to transcend any change of interest at the administrative level at an institution. So the first example, first real success that we had was late last year when we announced our first chair of Korean studies that was funded in part by the Korea Foundation, but funded, half-funded, a large endowment, half-funded by our Korean alumni as well. And we are in extensive discussions now with our alumni in a number of other countries, all focused on supporting the funding of either chairs or similar academic appointments in our new School of Global and International Studies. And that is the way in which we see the university really welding together its kind of international strategy, its extensive international alumni. We have 580,000 living alumni around the world, a significant number of whom are international, with the academic mission of the university to try to build this new School of Global and International Studies, which will be providing education from the bachelor's through to the PhD level with multiple masters, et cetera, in a coherent way, and really brings together the two strategies in a way that it really hadn't been before. So I'm hoping over the next few years we'll see further chairs funded by alumni or mechanisms like that in that school to really help give it the boost, the final boost that it needs to really elevate it to the top level in international studies in the country. So that's what we're doing at IU. Those are the strategies. That's how I'm trying to put it. How we're trying to put it all together. I'm very pleased with how it's gone. I'm really delighted that we're able to now, I think, really establish for ourselves the position internationally that we should have done many years ago, and that we can really play a major role in global education and global understanding in the United States.